This day in sports history. It's likely you've never heard the name Houston McTear. That's understandable, though if one or two things had gone just a little bit differently, the name Houston McTear may have been mentioned alongside the likes of Carl Lewis or Usain Bolt or Leroy Burrell, fast men that broke the tape at the end of a sprint in record time. Or maybe it's better to say they would have been mentioned alongside him. This is a guy who was on the cover of Sports Illustrated in 1978, and yet he's slipped through the cracks of history. Now, as the cliche goes, Houston McTear could run like the wind. His unnatural speed was completely natural, even though odds were against him from the start. He grew up in poverty in Baker, Florida. If he got one good meal a day, he considered himself lucky. He'd smoke a cigarette before getting into the starting blocks, and then he'd smoke the field. He didn't have a coach. Well, I should say, there was a guy that he called coach, but Will Willoughby considered himself more of a chauffeur to his athletes to the county and state meets than a guy who molded his athletes into better versions of themselves. Most who knew Houston's situation were shocked by the conditions that he had grown up in and lived in on a daily basis. He was one of 6 kids who lived with his parents in a 2-room shack next to a sawmill. No, Houston McTear was fast, not because of somebody else or something else. He could just move through air and space quicker than any human on the planet. But he wasn't supposed to. No formal training, no proper nutrition, no race prep other than an extreme confidence. And he was in high school. On this day in 1975, it was a hot one in Winter Park, Florida, with the mercury pushing past 105 degrees. Now, it's not weather that most of us would want to be outside in, let alone run as fast as we could for 100 yards. But Houston McTear loved it. He looked around at his teammates on this day as he puffed on his cool Filter King cigarette and said that he felt like thunder and lightning at the same time. He was confident that it was going to be a great day. McTear took his mark on the start line, stared down to the opposite end of the football field length of the track that he was getting ready to run, and knew without a doubt he was going to get there faster than anybody else lined up next to him. What he didn't know or even suspect is that he would get there faster than anybody else had ever done. The gun sounded. McTear took off. He crossed the finish line first. The 3 men timing the event clicked their stopwatches, and they couldn't believe what they were looking at. Their watches all read 9 seconds flat. They looked up at each other in disbelief. There had to be something wrong. One figured that they'd started the race from the wrong spot, so they went back to check it themselves. Nope, the race had started at the correct line. So they remeasured the distance. Maybe it was only 90 yards or 95 yards maybe. Nope, the track from start to finish was exactly 100 yards. How about the wind? What was the wind speed at race time? Surely this had to be a wind-aided thing, right? Nope. The wind was 2 miles per hour, within the accepted standard for a sprint. This high school kid, this high school junior, had just run a record time. Not just a high school record, not a state or U.S. record, but tied the fastest recorded time in the world at that point, equaling the time of 25-year-old Ivory Crockett, who'd run that fast the year before. It was so unbelievable that it wasn't believed. It took 3 months to verify that time by a track and field group in California. There had been an AccuTrack device at the finish line that day, but it wasn't being used to time the events, just to take a photo at the finish to prove who won. After this day in 75, the buzz around Houston McTear started. Now, he'd been known locally as being a fast kid, but now he started garnering attention regionally and then nationally. Harvey Glantz was about the same age as Houston McTear, and Glantz would go on to represent the U.S. in the Olympics 3 times. He recalled the first time he ever saw McTear at an event in Atlanta in June of '75. Glantz said, quote, "I was real anxious to see this guy everyone was talking about. I was taking practice starts and getting loose. We were called to the starting line for introductions, and when the official called McTear, we all turned to see this guy sitting up in the stands smoking a cigarette with his jeans and track shoes on. He stepped down on the track, pulled his jeans off, and ran a 9.2. I witnessed with my own eyes the lack of discipline and lack of training. This was just one incident that defined how talented this guy was. Never took one stride down the track, not one practice start, and ran a 9.2? End quote. McTear made the Olympic team in 1976, but he pulled his hamstring at the trials, and he was unable to even walk normally for several weeks, and instead an alternate took his spot. When Muhammad Ali heard about McTear's living conditions in Baker, he took an interest, and he ended up buying the family a new home. The associate that Ali used, though, was trouble, and would eventually be one of the reasons that we don't know the name Houston McTear. That associate of Ali was named Harold Smith, and he saw McTear as a way to make money. Lots and lots of money. He used Houston in an embezzlement scheme, unbeknownst to McTear that he was even involved in anything illegal. Instead, McTear was being used to shake hands and smile as the world's fastest man, and endorse the credibility of Harold Smith to the bank executives that he was dealing with. McTear went on to qualify for the 1980 Olympic team, but those plans, of course, were scuttled when Jimmy Carter boycotted the Olympic Games in the Soviet Union shortly after the trials ended. Maybe he could have made the 1984 team, but other bad things happened. Having missed his opportunity to run in '76 and again in '80, McTear began to drink. And then he started taking drugs. He got married, he had 2 kids, but his wife left him in 1980 and moved out of the country. In July of '81, FBI agents showed up at his door asking about his relationship with Harold Smith. Smith would later be convicted on 31 counts of embezzlement and sentenced to 10 years in prison. McTear didn't face any punishment for his part in the scheme, but his reputation had been damaged. He got a sniff by the Dallas Cowboys. Coach Tom Landry loved his speed, and McTear had actually played a little football back in high school, but it never really moved much past discussions. McTear's life continued to spiral downward with his expensive cocaine habit. The small amount of money that he had dried up, and he eventually ended up sleeping outside under a bridge, or he was once spotted sleeping next to a cactus. He attempted a comeback or two in the late '80s and actually won a 60-meter sprint as a 33-year-old at a Stockholm, Sweden indoor meet in 1990. But he just couldn't seem to recapture that magic he had on this day back in 1975, when Houston McTear, a 17-year-old high school junior, was the fastest man on Earth. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. Sterling Soap is 100% natural and with a variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, cologne, and many more personal care products in a large variety of scents, you're sure to find something that's perfect for you or that special someone in your life. Check them out at sterlingsoap.com. Hey, this is Steve White, your host for This Day in Sports History. The Houston McTear story is a fascinating one. I'm big on talking about what-ifs, and this is another one in sports. Houston McTear could have been one of those guys we talk about. If he doesn't suffer the hamstring injury in the '76 trials, maybe he goes to Montreal and beats Hazley Crawford to the line to win gold in the 100-meter and stifles the wave of Caribbean sprinters. Harvey Glance, a guy I mentioned earlier, finished fourth in Montreal. But life is life, and there are a lot of people who live life with unfulfilled dreams. McTear did get his life back on track in the late 80s. He remarried and he moved to Sweden. He died from lung cancer in 2015 at the age of 58. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.